This bass grew from 5 inches to 17 inches and 4.1 pounds in 17 months in a 2.5 acre pond, and this is how I did it. Welcome aboard, everyone. This is an overview of the Sugar Hill Outdoors pond. I was very fortunate to be involved with this pond since its construction in 2021. It's 2.5 acres and it's located in Brazelton, Georgia. It's very important that if you're going to build a pond or a small lake, that you have a consultant to kind of lead you through this process. Unfortunately, the information that you can find online is very inaccurate as to how to do this properly. And I want these videos to serve as a guideline for people who are pond owners or managing ponds, so they can get accurate information from a professional and not get hearsay information from the internet. I have a degree from the University of Georgia in fisheries biology, and I have been managing small ponds and lakes throughout the southeastern United States since the mid-90s. So what I'm about to give you here is scientific fact as best I've used them in the field over the last 3 decades. I'm not here to give you any opinions. I have a lot of boots on the ground experience doing this, and I really hope that this information helps you guys out. I think you'll find too that learning about the aquatic environment in this manner will also make you a better fisherman. Now, let's get down to brass tacks. To get to this point is skipping forward a pretty good bit. Like I said, I've been involved with this pond since 2021 during its construction. Let's look back at the pond basin and see what we had going back then. As you can see, we had a nice creek channel that ran the length of the pond, and we accentuated that with stumps and gravel beds and rock piles. Every pond is so different that I don't think there's much of a point in elaborating exactly how we broke all this habitat down. Every pond you manage will be different. Having an experienced consultant here will help you a great deal so you don't waste money with unnecessary expenses. The first stocking of fish that I put in were bluegill, and I stocked them at a variety of sizes. I put in 1,000 fish per acre from 2 inches to 6 inches, and I did that intentionally because I wanted to fill the pond instantly with bluegill. I wanted there to be plenty of bluegill at a variety of size, and that's important. This size bluegill here will begin to spawn immediately, putting small fish into the population. I want that bluegill population established, and we actually let it go for almost a year before we added bass and fed these bluegill every day throughout the warm part of the season. That's a critically important part to growing bigger bass, is having fed bluegill. Bluegill will take feed readily and will get much bigger than just a pond full of bluegill that were not being fed. That has to do with the conversion factor for largemouth bass. A bass has to eat 10 pounds of forage to gain 1 pound. So having a bluegill population that's fed benefits them greatly. Simply put, larger, heavier bluegill translate to larger, heavier bass. It's very important that you understand that this feeding program cannot stop ever. It significantly increases the amount of bluegill that can live in the lake. And by significantly, I mean we go from probably 70 to 100 pounds of bluegill per acre to 350 to 400 pounds of bluegill per acre. So if you start and stop a feeding program, you're doing immense amount of damage to the bluegill population, which in turn will do an immense amount of damage to your bass growth. So it's okay if you don't want to feed. Don't. The pond will naturally support, a certain number of pounds of fish per acre, and that depends on the productivity of where you are in the country. Moving forward to May of 2022, this is where I picked up the largemouth bass from the Titan Fish Hatchery down in Boston, Georgia. This project is very interesting in that we stocked northern bass and Florida bass into the same pond to observe the difference in their growth rates. I have found an immense amount of misinformation regarding Florida bass. If you listen to the internet, the solution to all your problems is simply just stocking Florida genetics. And my experience over the last 30 years is nothing could be further from the truth than that. We had our fish tagged with these pit tags, and that's a very new experience for me. I've never been able to tag fish in this manner and track, the difference in genetic strains in this manner. I have stocked a lot of lakes with Florida bass and a lot of lakes with F1 bass, but this is one of the first times I've ever had pure northerns. So this project has been very interesting to me to be able to document, because I've been able to observe these things, the difference between F1 and Florida bass growth, because I've stocked them a bunch of times. But this is one of the first times I've ever had pure northerns and Floridas in the same pond. It's been incredibly interesting watching the difference in the growth rates of these fish over the last year and a half or so. I'm going to go ahead and skip forward to currently. This video came through in late October, and you can see some of the bass mixed in with the bluegill around the feeder there. We've had extraordinary growth for our northern bass, the biggest fish coming in at 4.1 pounds. The Florida bass are extremely healthy in the pond as well, but they're not growing nearly as fast, the biggest fish being 2.5 pounds that we've documented thus far from the Floridas. I've observed this many times in dealing with Florida bass. Another observation that I've had with Florida bass is they're a little bit harder to catch, and sometimes significantly harder to catch. You generally see your catch rates go down per hour if you stock pure Florida fish. The idea behind this is to get the northern bass and the Florida bass to spawn. That's called an F1 bass, and they actually grow faster than both. Here is the 4.1 pound fish that we had sampled in late October. A northern fish growing exceptionally well. Here's another northern fish that came in, I think, around 3.1 pounds, growing very well. Here's a Florida fish we picked up last week at 2.3 pounds, and another northern at 3.1 pounds. Today's date is November 15th, 2023, and those bass were stocked last May in 2022. Thanks for following, and if you made it this far, please hit subscribe.